Hello, everybody. Welcome to this session. We're going to give everybody a chance to settle in for another minute, and then we'll get started right away. Maybe in the chat bot while we're all joining, throw in your name and where you're joining us from. And for us that are joining from far west in Canada, it's really early. So excuse us if we still look a little puffy. And I'm speaking about myself, not Brittany. But apparently it's 3 o'clock in the UK. So most of you are good. Okay. Awesome. So we got Alexandra from Romford, Essex, England. I run a small homeless charity called Friends of the Homeless. So nice to meet you, Alexandra, and welcome. Dave Hunter, Meme Partnership Manager, North Leeds. So nice to meet you, Dave, and welcome. Excellent. We'll give folks a few more seconds. Sandra, Systems Change Officer from Fulfilling Lives Southeast. Welcome from Canada. Thank you. I love your title too, Systems Change Officer. That's awesome. Excellent. Welcome. And Sarah from Fulfilling Lives Lambeth, Southwark, Lewisham. I'm probably mispronouncing this. I'm sorry. Zane, I know you, Zane, Director of Community Development from Alberta Rural Development Network. Welcome, Zane. And we're very, very lucky to be joined by one of your colleagues, John from ARDN on our team. Excellent. All right. Okay, so I'm going to get started on this because I know we've got tight schedules and everybody has other sessions to join us to join. So a reminder, if you have questions, throw them in the chat box because the presenters will kind of go back and forth on them to make sure we're answering as much as we can. We're going to start with just a quick intro so that you know who you're going to be hearing from this morning. And we're hoping to have some time to answer your questions as well at the end. So if we don't answer them in the chat box, we'll try to get them at the end as well. And otherwise, yeah, look forward to sharing some of our experiences from the US and Canada to those of you joining us from Europe. So thank you for the opportunity. So I'll just start with introducing myself. So Alina Turner, and I'm the CEO of Help Seeker, which is a social tech enterprise from Canada. And I'll tell you more about that when I get to my presentation. And I'm going to give the overview of what the topic is, which is systems mapping, systems integration, and how all these pieces fit together at a kind of higher level. And then we're going to move to Brittany Bishop from the city of Lethbridge, which is a city in Canada, in Alberta, Canada, that's been implementing some really innovative approaches to systems change and coordination. So she's going to give you that case study from her perspective at a municipal level. And then Tom Albanese, and Tom and I have done lots of work together on coming up with functional zero definitions and systems performance metrics. He's a pro at that stuff. If anybody needs any help figuring KPIs out or coordinated access, he's a technical expert from the US, and he does lots of work for HUD, which is the kind of federal government. And he's going to be speaking about the Columbus, Ohio case study, but same thing, trying to make this stuff real on the ground and not just theoretical. So with that, I'm going to get started on sharing my screen with you guys, and then yeah, and then we will get going. So pardon me for a second while I do my thing here. Yeah, apparently it's not that easy. There we go. Okay, hopefully you can see my screen now. Okay, so just making sure that you are in the right session, systems mapping and integration to prevent and end homelessness. Okay, and we'll get into my presentation now. So just a little bit about Help Seeker as well. So we're a B Corp social enterprise out of Calgary, Alberta. We work in diverse communities, and what we do is tech development, data management, strategy consulting, change management, and social innovation, and to resolve complex social issues. And that obviously includes homelessness, but is not limited to homelessness. So some of the context for why we're talking about systems mapping and as being a really key part of your change effort around homelessness is just the complexity of the social safety net that at least we in Canada operate through, and obviously the UK context will be different and the US context might be different, but for Canada at least, when you actually do your mapping of what's happening in terms of services, resources, financial flows. In Canada, it's quite a confusing jumble, and as a result of that fragmentation of services on the ground, it becomes really difficult to do any systems mapping or systems change efforts as a result. So what we try to do is bring us a sense of at least understanding. I wouldn't say it's where it needs to be, but at least we can start to understand what all these services are, what they're doing, who they're serving, so that we can actually analyze where the gaps are and where some of the root causes of the system's dysfunctions might be. Because again, you can't change something if you don't understand it. So it's just a little snapshot of what's happening in Canada here, and maybe this is informative when you reflect on the UK context. But to date, we've mapped about 134,000 services, benefits, and phone lines, and we think we're just starting to scratch the surface with this. That's huge, and you'll hear about Lethbridge, how that's a very, very well mapped ecosystem. And that is not limited to just homelessness, of course, but when you think about homelessness prevention, you need to understand the whole shebang to really get a sense of where your strategy needs to go and where you fit if you are a service provider. There's also a huge amount of investments that are happening in the social safety net in general. So in Canada, we've mapped about $280 billion in revenues. Again, that's by no means all of it. So there's much more that we haven't mapped yet. Majority of that comes from the taxpayer dollars primarily, or donations via government contracts or or government benefits. So when we think about how to enact some changes on the ground, and I want to make sure that what we're giving you is some practical examples of what this means in on the ground. When we thought about how complex the social safety net is and how difficult it is for people to navigate it, in the homeless world, we tend to start and end with homelessness, and that's just proven to be an unsustainable model, because essentially what happens is it becomes another treadmill or a hamster wheel for people to go through a coordinated access prioritization process and then get placed in one of 2 programs that happen to be part of that process. In the meantime, we've got this huge array of other services and benefits that would be really relevant to that person's well-being as well. So what we've started to move away from is this limited model around just homelessness and the homelessness experience, and move towards an integrated coordinated access approach where we try to make sense and we try to connect the dots between all of the programs that are operating, whether they're recreation or preventative youth services or counseling, and they might be private sector, they might be nonprofit, it doesn't matter. If they have a role to play in the social safety net to support social health or other needs, then we need to bring them into a coordinated model to make them more accessible to people in their journeys. So again, this is going to be something Tom picks up on as well, but it's much more than just homelessness. People's needs are layered, and so our responses need to be layered as well. And while housing and housing first is an important aspect of it, it's not the only one. So we have to make sure our system hits all of these critical needs. And these, I'm sure there's other ones. These are the ones we've kind of mapped over the years and explored further. But as you can see, it's not just housing, it's also community, it's also respect, it's also anti-discrimination, safety, and mental health, income, etc., food security. So when we think about it from this ecosystem approach, the housing sector, if you will, which is typically where our world, the homelessness world, sits, through shelter, transitional housing, and housing first programming, we all know we need to collaborate with justice or mental health or health and other basic needs, but we haven't necessarily done that in practice through kind of clear processes, clear data sharing, clear case, joint case management, and joint intervention models. So if we move beyond that limited approach, then we can see that we need to actually develop a coordinated access approach that includes all of these sectors as well. And it's, again, not just that, but also the way we link our KPIs or our data management of efforts, how we do coordinated access, all of that has to be done through an ecosystem model that is not limited to our homelessness only programs. So a couple other components of the integrated coordinated access model. It includes, and again, for us, we're talking about it from a help seeker standpoint, but there's other tools out there to do digital navigation. So we need to give people as many options as possible to get access to a consistent story in the social safety net. And that includes digital access. Of course, that's free, that's easy to access, easy to use, and consistent no matter where they are. The other one is systems navigators. So people who are trained and mobilized, and key access sites, and GP is oops, I forgot to take that out, but any city, key access sites. So where people are able to connect folks to resources. So they might be teachers in schools, they might be physicians, they might be library workers, and they might be your shelter workers as well, but they're navigators. They might be peer navigators. And then of course you've got, and however you call it, your integrated service tables for those with really complex needs where you need multiple systems to come together to do integrated service planning and case management, and housing interventions for those that need much more support. So those tend to be the key components that we see happen. A note here too, that around systems navigators, that it's like different strokes for different folks, essentially. There's the level one folks that are trained, that are community members, that are natural supports, that are trained on how to navigate resources and support people when they present for assistance, maybe from a preventative level. It could be a family conflict, don't know where to go. It could be, I'm struggling with my kid's mental health, I don't know what to do. Well, awesome, because if that kid doesn't get that help then, and that parent doesn't get that help, those issues get worse. So how do we train this army of natural or peer navigators out there. Level 2 for the more kind of not necessarily more complex, but folks that have much more knowledge. And how do we situate these guys in key sites where people naturally go? So it's the concept of fish where the fish are. These tend to be physicians, family physicians that do social prescribing. They tend to be teachers that or family support workers in schools. Or parole officers that help on the discharge and integration back from the justice system. And they tend to also be your kind of your typical homelessness sector workers as well that do this every day. But how do we get them all trained with the same script and the same kind of tools in their tool belt? And then level 3, these are your superstars, the street level outreach workers that, they might be street nurses, they might be kind of your go-to homelessness engagement experts that know how to engage with really folks that have complex needs and know how to navigate really complex situations with public systems as well. So this is how we've been coming up with the model moving forward. Of course, COVID has amped up the need for all of this work. So the need to move into the digital space has become even more critical, as has this need to connect the dots between diversion and intervention, especially when it comes to homelessness and homelessness risk. So if anything, it's been making this work even more accelerated for us, and really making the case that the path forward has to be integrated in practice and theory as well. So with that, I'm going to pass it over to Brittany Bishop, and she's going to take you through the Lethbridge experience. So go for it, Britt.
Wonderful, thank you. Thanks again for having Lethbridge here as a case study. We have been undergoing our systems planning integration journey since 2018. So Lena, you can switch to the next slide. Thank you. So again, in 2018 is when we started as a municipality looking at the increase in social disorder and homelessness within our municipality. And we were also noticing an increase in the number of strategies and initiatives and committees, all with good intent, working in an effort to curb the social disorder and homelessness within our community. And I think this statement at the bottom is really sums it up well. In Canada, 33.5 billion is spent each year on an array of 167,000 fragmented services provided by both government and nonprofits to address homelessness. There really must be a better way, more cost-effective, efficient way to achieve the results through coordinating this confusing jumble of services. And that's what we were finding in Lethbridge, is that often all of our strategies were overlapping. They had common goals, often the same committee members, and we were finding we weren't getting any further. And in fact, we were increasing in our homelessness. And so there was, in 2018, in the Community Social Development Department, we put a stall and said, okay, let's look at what's going on and try and get a better idea of what the needs within our community are and how best to unjumble this confusing mess of services for our community and for our homeless. Yeah, perfect. So in 2018, we developed a needs assessment. We conducted a needs assessment, and it was an extremely thorough needs assessment. Not to toot our own horn, but we were getting calls across Canada saying, wow, you guys did a lot of work in this needs assessment. It was data analysis, great literature, lit reviews, Stats Canada, our municipal census. We were going out to the community. We had community engagement, a really thorough look at our current efforts within the community, social asset mapping, and really reaching out to our community, saying what's going on for you, where is your well-being not being met. And what we found was we were approaching, we're now over 100,000 in population, and we had a stable and diverse economy. We have a higher than average population of seniors, children. We border two of Canada's largest Indigenous reserves. So we have a really high Indigenous population, both urban and rural, and it was increasing. And we also had high levels of immigrant and newcomers within Lethbridge. We were finding there was an increased demand for our basic needs. We were having high poverty rates, a lot of food insecurity within our seniors. Housing affordability was for our low income group was quite low. We had a rapidly increasing homeless population, which almost doubled in 1 year. And we were having some significant health and safety challenges as well. We were having a higher than average domestic violence, as well as higher than average overdose levels, higher than average police, and this is above the Alberta average. And so from this, we went to our council and suggested that we develop a well-being and safety strategy for our community. That would be looking at all the different safety and well-being strategies that were already done and ensuring we're not duplicating or overlapping our efforts. And what the four key concepts we wanted to land on with our safety strategy was individual well-being. So being able to look on a person-centered, not a system-centered basis. So, you know, ensuring that the senior who is Indigenous and transgender wasn't getting slotted into the seniors box. And what supports does this senior need? You know, looking at that individual in their entirety to say what needs does this individual need, not this senior, not this Indigenous person, and then ensuring that our systems to support this individual we're talking to each other and making sure we're not duplicating. So, you know, ensuring our health and our various different the systems integration within our big major systems and all of our strategies we're talking to each other. And so the other key concept was our collective impact. So working towards collective impact. So having a common agenda, shared measurements, mutually reinforcing activities, continuous communication, and then having the City of Lethbridge act as the backbone for this effort. And lastly, we wanted to look at integrating a community governance to ensure that this isn't a City of Lethbridge-led strategy. We wanted the community to take hold of it, and that would be the only way we would be able to create buy-in. And so our community governance was based on a group of funding agencies that would also be looking at what their resources should be contributing to in our community well-being. So next slide. So from this, we developed 4 strategic directions as a municipality to put our efforts towards. The buckets 2, 3, and 4, I think we largely were doing. So safe and resilient communities, basic needs, social inclusion. A lot of the pre-existing strategies we had were efforts within one of these 3 buckets. The big bucket that I think we were really lacking was our systems planning and integration. And that for the implementation of our community well-being and safety strategy was going to be the focus for the first few. Ideally, it was 1 to 2 years. We would really be focusing on our systems planning and integration, while systematically going through safe and resilient communities, basic needs, and our social inclusion actions. Next one. So to look at individual well-being, we wanted to start there and understand what makes an individual well. What can, again, like Alina had said, you know, housing first. We follow housing first, and housing is important, but it's not the only thing to well-being. And so looking at 15 key interrelated elements of well-being within our 3 different strategic directions. So for example, within basic needs, income, employment, transportation, food security, housing, safe and resilient, personal safety, justice and legal, somewhat similar to the well-being that Alina had brought up as well earlier in a slide. So looking at within each individual, maybe you don't have housing, but maybe you don't have family and community, spirituality, food security, or personal safety. So looking at each one of these on an individual basis, and then working to increase well-being in each one of those. Next one. So in order to do that, we knew that we would again have to do system mapping. So in order for us to say, okay, you scored low in spirituality and culture, we need to understand what spirituality and culture supports and assets we have in our community. So we worked with Help Seeker to do an asset mapping project. And this actually, I believe these statistics are a little low now. We had 111 agency accounts, and I believe we're actually over 1,600 listings now in 348 locations. And so, I believe in 2019 we had 40,000 interactions, and in 2020 it'll no doubt be a lot larger because we had just implemented Help Seeker in mid 2019 really, and so. We found this to be an extremely valuable tool, and our community is really taking to it. And like Alina said, now it's ensuring that we have our tier one being community, being able to have access to Help Seeker and ensure that our organizations are keeping up to date information. And it's gone quite well in our community. It's 1,600 listings. So yes, it's taken extremely well. Next one. And so now we're just at the implementation phase of our integrated service plan. And so we're integrating our 4 funding through our 3 funding pots. And so we're actually looking at integrating our coordinated access through one organization. So Alina had shown the first slide showing the kind of the 3 different systems navigator groups. And so we looked at who could be our tier 3, our experts in our community that are doing the integrated coordinated access and know know what all the services are to ensure that well-being is met on each of the 15 interrelated elements. So we are doing something similar to what Alina had described, is that looking at those low needs groups and having Help Seeker as well as a well-being screeners guide where what supports are needed for our low needs. So for example, early childhood parenting, food centers, or recreation programs, or mental health prevention, looking at our medium to high needs communities, and the acuity assessments that typically go with, for example, like a SPDAT, or being able to look at the needs and the availability of resources for this medium to high need group, such as social housing, addictions, outpatient services, counseling, housing supports. We're also doing adaptive case management. So we are streamlining our case management through one organization as opposed to having it fragmented by population or niche. And then our tier 3 is adaptive case management, and it's for our highest, most complex individuals. And we have a integrated coordinated access partnership table. So looking at the really, really complex groups of individuals and what their needs are, such as permanent supportive housing, specialized addiction treatment, or institutionalization if necessary. And so we're excited. We're just heading into this. We are finalizing our contracts, and I think our community is excited about it, and will to be determined on the success we have. But we're feeling hopeful, and it's been an exciting journey looking at all the services and supports our community has, and doing our best to integrate them and coordinate them and reduce our duplications. So hopefully I can be back next year and give you a taste for what our first year of integrated coordinated access has looked like. So thank you. I believe that's my last slide. All right, wonderful.
All right. Good morning or good afternoon, everyone, depending on where you're sitting on the globe. I don't know about you all, but I was really excited to hear about what Britt shared and what's happening in Lethbridge and with Help Seeker. I think it's the way forward. Um, what I would like to share with you today is some context from Columbus, Ohio, and a little bit of what's happening in the U.S. It's obviously the context is slightly different than Canada, and our approaches are somewhat different, but I would say that the principles are the same. If you flip to the next slide, Alina. So I always like to remind folks that back in 1943, Abraham Maslow came up with this thing called the hierarchy of needs. And I feel like in many ways, as a trained sociologist myself, that we continue to go back to this basic understanding of how people thrive and what well-being means and those fundamental elements to well-being. And this is particularly true in the US, and I imagine in the UK and Canada around social determinants of health and other sectors that are starting to embrace the idea of the whole person approach to provisioning care or services, and recognizing that we cannot succeed in doing that if we treat people in silos, either as a system or as a program or as an agency. And it's important to sort of break beyond that. And as Alina and Britt just shared, I would say for homeless crisis response systems in particular, this has been a longstanding challenge to move beyond just the housing focus, the housing first emphasis, to develop more person-centered models that keep housing as a prime objective, stable housing, that is, while also concurrently assuring that other needs are met to the extent a person has a desire to have those needs met. You flip to the next slide, please. So in Columbus, Ohio, we are a very fast-growing community. We are the state capital of Ohio, and we are positioned in Franklin County. Franklin County has a population of about 1.3 million. And in Franklin County, and Columbus in particular, we have an exploding housing market that is causing great pressure on housing costs, and vacancies have shifted in the rental market from about 10%, 8 to 10% vacancy just about 10 years ago to now well below 5%. And it's creating, along with sort of the economic situation we face today, but the data you're seeing now is all pre-pandemic, but it's creating great pressures, particularly on low-income families and individuals who are struggling to find affordable housing, keep their head above water, and avoid homelessness. One of the things that has been heartening in Columbus, and I think this is also true in many communities now, is the recognition of the value of stable housing to community well-being, not just individual well-being, and understanding that it's a community purpose to make sure that individuals and families have safe, affordable places to reside and are not continually upended in their housing and finding themselves in a homeless situation. One of the things that I'll add to, similar to I think what we're seeing in many communities, is the concentration of poverty in neighborhoods where there's growing population, growing number of households that are lower income, and a net zero increase in housing stock that's affordable for such households. We have neighborhoods like that in Columbus where there are growing pockets of concentrated poverty that are largely driven by newcomers and people who are arriving in Franklin County. Oftentimes, these are immigrant families or households. Sometimes there's secondary migration, households who are moving from other communities in the U.S. To be closer to family or networks that they have here in Columbus. But that's a very troubling sign for us because as we look at these concentrated neighborhoods, there is a dearth of resources in those neighborhoods and supports and even basic amenities like public transportation and stores and groceries and the like. So we have a compounding problem in Columbus. If you flip to the next slide. But as we sort of think about how do we sort of, I like to think of our work as in some ways looking from the bottom of Maslow's pyramid up, and how do we move people from a state of absolute homelessness and poverty, really the lowest rung on our economic ladder, to stability and to greater well-being. We as a homeless crisis response system have to do more than live within our own bubble and our own system. I'm showing you now a basic sort of system map. This is a schematic that is used in Columbus. It's also similar to some of the federal ways of presenting homeless crisis response systems. But as you can see, while we might have a well-organized response, and I'm proud of the fact that Columbus has been really ahead of the curve in that regard, having a well-organized response. It's very data-driven and performance-focused. We are now looking to move beyond our own boundaries to build these bridges with other community systems and resources, and really turn our system inside out, where, and I would argue every system inside out, where we are literally changing the orientation and the focus to a person-centered model, where we're not looking at how the institution might fulfill a particular need, but rather looking at the whole person and how various institutions or resources can best meet that individual's needs, as is expressed in the help seeker model. Next slide, please. And so when we think about homeless crisis response systems, this is a basic conceptual model that we use often to just describe to our community partners what it is that our crisis response system seeks to do. And really the prime message in this is to really emphasize this function of stabilizing and connecting individuals and families to community supports. In other words, reconnecting them as an intentional purpose of the homeless crisis response system to a wide array of community supports that help to meet their immediate and urgent housing needs, but also longer term help to address other needs, whether it be health related, education, employment, or a wide range of needs related to well-being. And so this is really a principal aim of our homeless crisis response system as we move forward and seek to improve what we do. We are now beginning to measure and look hard at how successful we are in not just resolving the immediate crisis, but preventing a return to the same crisis and helping individuals and families connect to those resources. Next slide, please. So some of the key drivers in the US and Columbus in particular, as we make this fundamental shift from an institution-centered to a person-centered approach. Obviously, the current pandemic has really brought into stark relief some of these deficiencies in our collective responses to individual needs. That has been, I think, for everyone, a major wake-up call that we have to not just assure that we're preventing homelessness wherever possible and ending it quickly when it does happen, but that we are attending to the health needs of individuals experiencing housing crises, and doing that in an integrated way that is least burdensome to that individual and puts the onus of coordination and integration and care provision on systems and system actors to make that happen. One of the major threads in the U.S. That I think folks are aware of is really become the central focus now within the homeless sector is ending systemic and structural racism. We know that homeless systems have a long way to go in terms of our part to provide greater equity and to, as I like to say, stimulate corrective action when it comes to social racism and structural racism, that we have an obligation to give people who have suffered through structural racism a greater lift and greater resources, greater access, and we have to be intentional about where we and how we make resources accessible and whether or not we have equity in outcomes. Another thread for us is what's happening in the health sector around, as I mentioned, social determinants of health. That has really, one of the ways we have thought about this is we are continually, as a system, building bridges outward. And now we have other systems, other institutional partners building bridges from the other side of that gap toward us. That's especially true for health systems. In Columbus, we have 4 major health systems that each are operate in their own bubbles, if you will. But they have been actively, as is true across the U.S., actively investing in and focusing on housing and education and employment and food security and a range of other basic needs as a fundamental facet of what health systems do to promote greater well-being and to reduce crisis care. That has opened up opportunities for us to forge new partnerships. We are working, for example, with our local nationwide Children's Health Hospital here in Columbus to build common screening around housing crises and common response and referral guidance that allow our systems to mutually interact and use similar tools and approaches and training and so forth to respond to the housing needs of people presenting to the health systems, and conversely to address the health needs of people presenting to the housing crisis response system. I also want to just mention that Housing First and sort of the evolution of Housing First has been a major driver. I think, as was mentioned, we are evolving our thinking around Housing First. I'm an ardent supporter of Housing First, but I also believe Housing First is not housing only. And that's been a tension point in the U.S. around more clearly defining what it means to promote immediate access to stable housing while simultaneously addressing other needs and not letting the efforts to address other needs slow down the resolution of the housing crisis. But how do we do this in a coordinated, integrated way is really now becoming the central question. For us in Columbus and in other communities, this also plays out as we build out our prevention approaches and look to target prevention to those concentrated communities where we see large pockets of poverty and other deprivation. And most especially for youth, this has become a very material effort as we work on improving our responses to youth. So just as a specific case study, if you flip to the next slide, our work around youth has really come to the fore in the last 2 years. We received, as many communities have across the U.S., a major infusion of federal dollars to drive our development of responses for youth experiencing homelessness. And so as you see on this snapshot of our needs assessment that we completed just last year, the youth that we have interviewed and heard from and listened intently to have helped us better understand the wide range of their needs and where they see deficiencies in the supports offered to them. and frankly, the disparities that we see across people who experience homelessness relative to the broader population in terms of rates of homelessness, and just simply access to services, not just housing and homeless services, but a wide range of community supports. So if you flip to the next slide, you'll see that our efforts to address those needs are varied. This is just a selection of some of the things that we're now actively working on, and it's very much akin to what HelpSeeker does, and the basic intention behind that. One of the things that we have now developed is a youth coordinated access team. This is a roving team that can meet youth wherever they are at, and they're equipped to help youth immediately navigate not just the homeless system, but a wide range of other services. So it's very akin to that tier 2 or tier 3 model that Alina shared, where we have specialized navigators working directly with youth. We're in the very early conceptual stages of working with our health system partners and others to develop mobile applications for youth that literally can be in the palm of their hand and give them access to a wide range of resources that they can direct and control. We're actively using case conferencing within our homeless crisis response system and increasingly across systems to bring people to that community table, as Britt shared. That same idea is something that we're pursuing. And then finally, we are now defining success for our homeless crisis response system as being multifaceted, not just around housing, but also for youth. We have now measures around education, employment, health and well-being, and relationship goals. Again, I'll just sort of conclude with this point that as we do that, we feel and we are working through the tension of how do we keep our primary focus on resolving the housing crisis as a fundamental prerequisite for thriving and addressing other well-being needs, while we don't slow down that effort to resolve that housing crisis. So that is our challenge, and we're actively working on it. And I think at this point, we're going to shift over to you all and ask some questions. So Alina, I'm going to pass it back to you.
Awesome. Thank you. Thanks so much. It's so cool to see all this stuff from other communities. So thank you. And let's turn it over to some of your questions. Okay, so did I stop can you still see my screen? Stop share. There we go, because then I can't see the questions. All right, so Q&A, let's see what we got. We're gonna, oh, Jonathan. Hello, Jonathan. I was like, I'm in the wrong area because I saw a question from Jonathan. Jonathan is with CMHC, so Federal Corporation on Housing, and they lead the implementation of the National Housing Strategy. I think this is for, I can answer some of this stuff. So do the mid-high acuity also use HelpSeeker in your community, or is it only limited to low need? And was it difficult to get the city on board? So I think, Britt, you can take those.
Yeah, absolutely. We grappled with this a bit, and I think at the end of the day, our mid to high needs do not necessarily have to go through HelpSeeker. I think they would be going through it with the support of CMHA, depending on the level of need, or like Alina had said, working with family doctors, kind of that mid tier 2 group to help them coordinate that. But they would, depending on their level of need, mid to high would be doing light to high case management within our adaptive case management. So they would be working with HelpSeeker to guide individuals to the right needs for their, or the right supports rather for their needs.
Yeah. So so the HelpSeeker app is really where even the doctor would see like what capacity there is in the system. So it kind of acts as like this kind of catch-all of all the services. But the well-being screener that Britt mentioned before, Yeah, that one is kind of like a self-assessment so that people can do the self-assessment and then get referred, because a lot of people don't know what they need, believe it or not. So we did some kind of prototyping in the community, and people just, they didn't even know what to ask for, whether they were high needs or low needs. So that's why the well-being screener came in, and those domains that Brittany presented, those get linked to the back end of Help Seeker, and it has an AI back end that makes suggestions for what they might be looking for based
And
on
we're
how
going to
they
be
self-assess. Go ahead, Britt, sorry.
yeah, and so we're also going to be using the well-being screener as a method for assessment and reporting the success in our case management and our integrated coordinated access. So having an individual do a well-being screener throughout their time in case management to recognize, okay, I was low in culture and spirituality, then integrated coordinated access or case management provided supports for that, and lo and behold, then that increase in my well-being screener, and that was reflected in that later on. So yeah, I think for across the board, we'll be integrating the well-being screener in those 15 interrelated domains.
Yeah. Oh, and then the other question for you, Britt, was if it was difficult to get the city on board. You are the city, but you can maybe speak to what you guys had to do internally to get this going.
Yes, you know, this came from the Community and Social Development Department. The social disorder within our community was increasing, and it was evident to our city council, as they generally are the first ones to hear it. So we provided to them the needs assessment and our strategy development, and they were unanimously on board. There's going to be change management within our organizations. I'd say the only concern or pushback we received was from our social service agencies, which is not unexpected, wondering what their funding is going to look like and what integration could mean for them. But at the end of the day, we always put it in a perspective of what's best for the community, what's best for the individuals you're serving, and working through change management in that way. But the city council was unanimously on board. We've attended city council 3 times, and each time they've been extremely pleased with the direction we're going.
Britt, I think this one's for you too. Can you define adaptive case management? And I can
What we were finding
too after.
Sorry.
Oh, I was just saying if I can help with examples from other communities too, if needed.
Sure.
After.
Sure. What we were finding within our community is we had a great deal of case management. We just completed an RFSQ for our funding cycle, and one of the highest submissions was for case management, but it was really niched by population or a specialty. And we were finding the quality and the consistency of the case management was not there. And so we said, instead of having case management broken out into speciality, we would make it adaptive. So one agency does our case management for youth, for seniors, for specialized population, working with our special organizations such as our senior centers to ensure that their case management is best suited for that population, but adaptive in need, adaptive in population, in level of need. Alina, do you have anything else to add to that?
No, it's interesting because in bigger cities, you can see that you might need specializations because you've just got lots going on. In a city of 100,000, it didn't make sense to, well, and in practice, it didn't work very well to divvy up the person or the family like that, because we would have families where, the dad was low acuity and was struggling with mental health, but the mom was, high acuity and intergenerational trauma, and then the kids were okay for now. So then, where do you put that? You can do kind of a, you do your best, but then the family changes, or the dynamics of the person's life change too. So what would happen is you would do your acuity assessment, and then you'd say, okay, you're no longer high acuity, you're now low acuity. You got to go to this program, which again, it didn't quite make sense. Or you would say, oh, you're youth, and now you're 24 or you're 22, and now you got to go to this program because that's the one that does youth. So in a community that's only 100,000 people, where it just didn't make sense to not have things integrated. So for Lethbridge, what they did is kind of they just merged and into one kind of universal case management program. But then within it, obviously there's Indigenous specializations that you can tap into. There's children and youth specialization, or seniors as well. So they've contracted out kind of specialized supports to complement that adaptive case management team, and that's to kind of to plug in these additional pieces where that adaptive case management team needed additional support to meet emerging needs. So yeah, it's been done in Calgary as well, as another example I'm familiar with, and that's a big urban center in Alberta. It's about 1.2 million people. Same idea. The problem was that when you have this prescribed model, it's like 10-1 case management to client ratio, or you have to have this acuity, and it just was creating barriers in practice. So they try to kind of flip it and say, let's just build something that's responsive to the client versus the funder, and let's see how it goes. So there's pros and cons to all of it. It's the point is that you're thinking about it, you're monitoring, and you're adapting as you go. So yeah, that was the model there. Yeah, so hopefully that helps. Jonathan asks about I think this was from Tom's point, and he's asking whether the $100 increase in monthly rent is associated with 15% increase in homelessness. Such a powerful stat. Do we have an equivalent in Canada? Yes, we do, but it's not just rent increases. So it's in Canada, the modeling that's been done, and actually Steph Jones, who presented with us a couple of weeks ago, and works with Jonathan too. He's on an AI digital transformation project that is looking at a predictive algorithm on homelessness, suicide, and domestic violence. And that's in the time of COVID. So the things that we're exploring are for sure rent, but there's also economic indicators, so like, and population indicators, so population growth, weather patterns, COVID, GDP, suicide, mental health, hospitalization. There's lots of factors that play into predictions of homelessness. So, so yes, we do have this, but it's not just the rent thing that's being looked at right now, because it seems to be much more nuanced, and especially when you look at it from community to community as well. Yeah, so stay tuned for the full model in the next 6 months. We have a basic model now, but we will have a even more nuanced one that's also connected to Google analytics and social media text analysis, so that we understand how people search for help, and then also what's available locally to say, well, here's the right mix of services to be able to respond more effectively. And then David, Brittany, you're popular today. Brittany mentioned community consultation. How are you engaging people with lived experience, experts by experience, individuals who have experience of the system you're looking to change? Yeah, I think this was definitely in the needs assessment, but also in the governance and performance management quality assurance process. But I'll let Brittany answer that one as well.
So we did, as a part of our needs assessment, do extensive community consultation, and we did group it by, for example, our social organizations, our social service organizations. We did extensive consultation with them, our community, our city council, our city administration, lived experience. We did a great deal of community consultation. I would say maybe to the extreme. It's interesting that, to my point earlier, that the only pushback we really got was from our social service agencies, and they were the ones in the community consultation that was like, something has to change. This is crazy. We're duplicating. This isn't working. So that was overwhelmingly what we heard from the social service agencies. So we do have a communication engagement strategy now that we'll be going to council with for the ongoing consultation and looking at the impact and the quality assurance of the systems change itself. So that will be up to council if they find that we're going to be doing enough. But we do have a draft.
Okay, and maybe I'll let Tom, any comments based on the questions that you saw that you'd like to send everybody off with?
No, I really just appreciate everyone's interest in the topic, and I think this is, I think the notion of system integration and getting beyond our own houses is where we're heading, and just want to thank everyone again for joining us today.
So thanks so much, and we'll be sharing the slides, so not to worry. Awesome. Thanks everybody. Have a wonderful rest of the day. Thanks.
Thanks everyone.